Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. I hope you can all hear us loud and clear. Our session is about climate justice in the city of The Hague, and it's about connection with youth. So peace, youth, and justice is our title. Let's talk climate injustice in The Hague. And we want to share some thoughts with you about the research that we've done at the University of Applied Sciences for the past 3 years. And I'm here with my students, and we will briefly introduce ourselves and then tell something about the climate justice situation, current situation about climate justice, and also about the research agenda that we are following at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. And as I said, the study that we are doing with students about the International City of Peace and Justice, and what the connection is with young people in The Hague with this theme. And we recently started with a pilot study about climate justice and youth. So we would really want to share our thoughts about that and also have a discussion with you. So we will first show you some slides and then we'll make it a little bit more interactive and share some statements with you and see where we get after our talk with these statements, and if we can really have a discussion about what climate justice means and how we can make the cities we are living in more climate just. So I'm Rosa Groen. I'm the interim professor of global citizenship at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and focusing on the International City of Peace and Justice, but also on what youth participation can do with this theme of peace and justice. And well, over to you.
Hi, my name is Anastasia Pinkse, and I'm a student focusing mainly on European studies. As it says there, I'm a specialist in women's rights at the EU level. I've done a thesis recently about this topic, specifically a new directive that's aimed at combating violence against women. And this is another side project I have been doing with my fellow colleague.
Hi, I'm Looze, and I'm a first-year European studies student, and I have an interest in climate justice.
Great, thank you so much. So, well, the current situation really briefly, actually, we all know that lots of flooding has been happening and lots of heavy rainfall, and of course, other catastrophes that are following the climate change. Well, the research shows, and we all know that a small percentage, like the very rich people, have the biggest impact on climate change and pollute the most, whereas the big percentage of the really poor people have the biggest problems with the results of climate change. You can see here 2 flooding situations of only this year. So in March, I think in Kazakhstan and Russia, there were big floodings, and last week in Germany, and a few years ago also in the Netherlands, in Limburg, at the border of Germany. And those disasters are coming more often and they're heavier. And at what cost, right? So most of the time, people in the most difficult situations, they pay the bills, whereas the people that are really rich, they pollute the most. So there is a big problem there. And I see that a lot of governments are already seeing those problems and also doing their best. But the most easiest solutions like CO2 tax or tax on consumption is not really happening yet. So we as a research group, Global Citizenship, have started a program to give climate change and climate crisis a more prominent place in the curriculum. So also in education, you can do a lot with this topic about the situation, but also about how to advise governments and how to listen to people that are really suffering, and how can we all show the way to be helped if you are living in such a neighborhood with more flooding or worse heat temperatures in the summer, for example. So we are focusing with our research agenda climate justice on what it means and what it looks like in The Hague. What are the causes for climate justice and climate injustice in the neighborhoods, and not only in The Hague, but also in the Global South? And which actors experience climate injustice in the city, and how can they be participants in creating solutions? So we are now in 2 different studies, but there are definitely more, but I highlight only those 2 about the students that conducted the pilot, and we will follow up on their pilot next year. And the other project is the Hague Climate Agreement, where the climate tables have been discussed with citizens in The Hague. So a study a little bit linked to this, and this is not about climate injustice or climate justice, but it's more about how the city of The Hague can be a true city of peace and justice, including their youth groups in different areas. We looked at this topic for the last 3 years with students. So the first year in 2022, students were doing interviews in the youth centers in The Hague in 3 areas, disadvantaged areas. And from these interviews, we derived statements, and those statements were used in the follow-up study, where we not only interviewed youth groups in the neighborhoods of The Hague, but also educators of higher education, or not higher education, but secondary education, so schools in The Hague. And we compared those 2 groups to the policymakers of the City of Peace and Justice. So not only policymakers of the City of The Hague, but also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the international institutions, such as UN institutions in The Hague. The last year, so we just finished with presentations yesterday. On the basis of this study, we also went to schools, so not only the youth centers, but this year we interviewed lots of young people, the age of 13 to 17, in schools, where we asked them questions via our students about peace, justice, injustice. What do you think a secure neighborhood looks like? What do you think the police should do to be more people-friendly? And what is injustice and justice and security meaning to you? So these were very interesting studies, and we would like to share some results from those. The first study was mainly focused on SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And we found that in the neighborhoods, I have to say, it was during a lockdown or just after a lockdown due to the COVID crisis. So in 2022, lots of young people in these areas were complaining about the police and about being racially profiled by the police. And they do not feel connected at all with The Hague's brand, peace and justice. They feel unheard, discriminated against, and would like more influence in schools, but also more influence in their own neighborhoods. And they are definitely willing to learn more about the International City of Peace and Justice, but also about international cooperation and European institutions. So they were really interested in that. The second year, what was really interesting, we focused not only on the young people in the neighborhoods, but we also looked at the educators and policymakers, as I said, but we not only looked at the SDG 16, so peace, justice, and strong institutions, a very important SDG for the City of The Hague, but we also looked at the EU climate policies, because those just came about, the Fit for 55 package, which means that all the new cars in the EU must be electric vehicles from 2035, but also lots of EV stations will be built and solar panels will be mandatory. Well, there were lots of regulations from the EU level, so we have to go through a big transition, and we were very curious what young people think about that and how they see those measures and what they know about those measures. So we took statements from the first year, but we also invented new statements about this EU level Fit for 55 package and the climate policies at a local level. And again, about City of Peace and Justice and how they viewed peace, justice, injustice, security at schools and at neighborhoods levels. So SDG, as you might know, is one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 16 is really the whole slogan of SDG 16 is to promote peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development. And which is really important in this sense is that it needs to provide access to justice at all levels. So also the young people in the neighborhoods need to be part of the the sustainable and strong institutions, and they need to be effective, accountable, and inclusive. So most of the young people that we spoke to, they didn't know about having a say at the local level. But what we try to do is to teach them and to ask them how they would feel if they would have lots of things to say. So 84 participants, again, lots of participants in this Q method study. A Q method means that the students were going to the young people and they would show 24 statements in this year, and these statements were all about they were all a little bit you really needed to give your position in the statement. So the statements were either you were against them or you were in favor of them, and then you had to place them in a forced distribution on a sheet of paper, being one being -4, like I really don't agree, and one statement being +4, and the others towards the middle were more neutral. What we found of the 84 participants, we all put them in the software, so there were many young people, many educators, and just a few policymakers. But what we found is that the educators and the policymakers, they formed one group, so they had the same kind of perspective. And they, their perspective, the most agreed upon statement was selection based on skin color is unacceptable. So that's the racial profiling. And international cooperation should play a role in young people's lives. That was the policymakers, educators group. The second group that we named participatory peace were the young people, like most of the young people, and for policymakers. And they were, their strongest statement was police are not allowed to touch you under any circumstances. And they didn't agree about on the statement, police are not allowed to touch you. Oh, no, they all agreed about this statement. And the equal and fair peace, the third group, that were mainly young people. And I must say those groups are really young. So the second group were the youngsters between 18 and 25 years old. But the third group were the 14 and 15 years old. And they had the strongest agreement about schools should be given more opportunities to support poor families financially. And they thought all police officers should be trained to reduce discrimination. And about the sustainability statements, they most disagreed about stores such as Shine and Action and Alibaba must be obliged to sell sustainable products. So they were not in agreement about that statement. The third study that we did with the same type of student, public administration students, were to bring the policymakers together with the youth groups. So we had this first year of only interviewing youth groups, and then we compared the policymakers, educators, and the youth groups in their positions. And this year we brought them together. So we really wanted these youth groups to be in contact, in direct dialogue with policymakers, not only to be heard and to ask them questions about what do you think that The Hague should do to involve your age group in peace and justice issues, but also to see if there could be a less distance between policymakers and politicians and or even police officers and youth groups. So these dialogues were about listening to them, about taking away the distrust, and about students advising. The students of ours were the facilitators of the dialogue, so they really made sure there was a dialogue, and this was sometimes not easy because the young people in the schools were not really interested in the topic, and the youngsters that you see here at the picture, they were, but they were really distrustful because they really thought this is again a research about this, and why is the situation not better in our neighborhood? So the advice of the students is to make pop-up events, to use more social media channels for communication about international organizations and peace and justice brands of The Hague, and to make use of youth councils.
Okay, so now we move over into another study, which is focused mainly on climate justice and youth. This study came about during an interview that we had with a municipal office official of The Hague. He was mostly specialized in green energy, but it gave us the idea to focus on 2 council meetings of 2 different neighborhoods in The Hague, which were specifically Statenkwartier and Laakkwartier. These council meetings were organized by the citizens or the residents of these neighborhoods. And what we did was mainly focus on the perspective of the citizens that participated in those council meetings. How did they experience it, and what recommendations or themes did they discuss during those meetings? First, we will go over Statenkwartier, and then we will analyze Laakkwartier. And I will give the floor to Stan to introduce Statenkwartier.
Yes, Statenkwartier is of course a neighborhood in The Hague, and it has around 10,000 residents. 49% of the inhabitants have a migration background. 36 are rental homes, and 56 have an energy label of F or G. And there was a council meeting in Statenkwartier in October 2022. And the main themes and advices that they wanted to give the municipality had to do with the living and energy, the knowledge that's available, and the information they can get. They wanted alternative transportations. They wanted more rules and more ability for car uses and parking. One example of this is sharing cars. So they wanted parking spaces for share cars, so that they can share cars, so they don't all need to own a car. And they wanted more green and public spaces.
So now I provide the neighborhood profile of Laakkwartier. So as you can see, Laakkwartier is far more populated compared to Statenkwartier, and it has around 46,000 residents. And as you can see, there's also a big percentage of almost 80% of the residents that have a migration background. 69% of the homes there are rentals, and 5,437 properties have an energy label of G, meaning that these houses are not sustainable at all. So They organized a council meeting in spring and fall of 2022. These are two separate meetings that were held. Most importantly, also to note is that La Quartier was awarded as the worst neighborhood of The Hague in 2021 in a study done by the Vrije Universiteit. So as you can see that, and you compare it to also the background with a lot of migration workers and inhabitants, you can see that it's completely different to Statenkwartier. During those council meetings, the citizens proposed 6 recommendations. The first one is to have a clear and affordable route to a sustainable home. What they emphasize with that is that the citizens wanted to create something of a roadmap that would highlight how every type of home, whether it's an apartment or a single household, how they can get more funding from the government or from the municipality in order to change into a more sustainable home. Also, highlighted was that the transition vision from going to a more sustainable area or neighborhood was placed by or made by the municipality of The Hague as set from 2040 instead of 2025. So 2040 is such a long period ahead, and these people have the lowest income. They are a low-income neighborhood, and as Rosa mentioned before, these citizens do not get the priority that other citizens do get, that have more money and are more have more access to green and sustainable energy. The second one is information is accessible and comprehensive. La Quartier has a lot of low literacy. So this means that a lot of citizens have trouble reading and writing. And when it comes to renewable energy sources and the energy transition, the jargon that's used is very difficult, and sometimes it's too complex, and especially for people that have a migration background and the Dutch language is not their native language. So what they proposed is to have one trustworthy, clear source in an approachable, recognizable council office that makes it more easier for the citizens to access and to get the information that is out there. And the third recommendation was we're doing it together. This means that there is a low cohesion among the residents, and they really want to tackle this energy transition together as a neighborhood. So what they want also is to have a better connection with authorities. And as Rosa also mentioned in the youth research that she did, is that a lot of those children, but also especially the youth, they feel disconnected from police or authorities. And this was also highlighted and emphasized in this council meeting. So therefore, they proposed that the municipality would organize sustainability activities where district agents, municipal officials would also join, and this would create that there also needs to be done a research about the motives and the needs for residents relating to sustainability. How can they approach these residents more easily? How can we create a cohesive neighborhood that can depend on each other and ask favors or questions, especially related to energy transition? The fourth topic is collective technical solutions are used. This emphasized to create a storage unit where renewable collective energy can be stored permanently. Moreover, residents really want to have a a place where they can collectively buy solar panels that makes it easier and cheaper for them to start this energy transition. The fifth topic is balance and relationship between tenants and landlords. As I said before, around 80% of the homes are rentals. So that means that a lot of landlords are basically are in power to create a more sustainable home. However, tenants are at a disadvantage here, and therefore they want to facilitate conversations between tenants and landlords relating to sustainability and renewable energy sources for their homes. The sixth and last recommendation is to have a green neighborhood. The La Quartier is mainly concrete and a lot of buildings, and there's not enough green, which makes it harder for the water to drain when there's a lot of heavy rainfall. So therefore, they want to have more public spaces that are greener, and also to have a green tramway track. So the municipality of The Hague started a action plan specifically related to La Quartier. However, as you can see on those 6 topics, a lot of them are either, the half is either unclear or delayed. And this makes it quite a challenge. And it again emphasizes how these people from low-income neighborhoods and that are far more disadvantaged feel again disadvantaged and taken for granted by the government, by the municipality of The Hague. They have the feeling that they are not seen. Yes. Okay, so now I want to link it to the youth. I had the privilege to join Rosa and go to an observation at the Maris College. And here youth and policymakers joined in a discussion about peace and security on a municipal level, on a national level, and also on an international level. As Rosa mentioned, peace and security are the branding topics used by the Hague, as it is the city of peace and justice. What was interesting, as I observed, was that a lot of the youth emphasized again how they feel a distrust from police and also authorities. But what I missed in the discussions was relating to security was the environmental perspective. I think especially because The Hague is so close to the sea, there is a huge emphasis on, there must be more of a huge emphasis placed on sustainability, on climate change, and especially in the security angle. And I think this is something that is missed and might be, should have been discussed more. However, what I do think was interesting again as well is that most of the youth did not know that The Hague was the city of peace and security. And therefore, they also recommended to the policymaker that there has to be a more of an emphasis on peace and security, either through lessons at school or maybe more again of those dialogues and discussions. Yeah, so that's it. I think it's now time for a Q&A. I will stop sharing the screen, and I hope that there are any questions.
So yeah, if you want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand. As you can see in the chat, we also would like you to remind the professional conduct, but you've all been very silent, so I think that's working out. One question, how did youth define climate justice? How did you define it in your study? That's a very good question. I think climate justice in our research line, we define it very broadly. We look at it at a local level, but also at international level, and we do see the energy problems in the neighborhoods. We also see that as climate injustice. And we are also looking at the consumption and to try to influence behavior towards less consumption. So consuming is also in a way a form of climate injustice, because lots of people don't know that if you consume a lot or buy a lot of plastics, you are doing damage at the other side of the world. So we also, with our climate justice team, want to emphasize that overconsumption is also a form of climate injustice. So it's very broadly formulated, but did you see general differences in the definition as well? If you also saw differences between normative or definitions, probably by adults versus articulated by youth. No, we haven't really seen different definitions. However, in our study in the neighborhoods, we have seen that young people see the climate and sustainability issues as more natural than the educators and policymakers, for example. So what we found very hopeful, actually, is that the statements about sustainability, for example, we need to insulate the houses and people need financial support for that. We found that the youth groups actually thought that was really normal and that everyone should be able to turn their houses into sustainable houses, and that financial support should be given by governments. So I think whereas the educators and policymakers were more of course in favor of sustainable transitions, we thought that the youth groups wouldn't be in favor of that because they were had bigger problems in their lives. But actually they surprised us by saying, of course, we all need a sustainable future, and this is one of the themes that is important. How do you see the youth's role in the future in The Hague? Would you like to answer that, Anastasia?
Okay, sure. So I believe that the youth in The Hague will get a bigger role, especially if they would go to The Hague University, where already topics on environmental damage and environmental changes have been integrated into the curricula. However, I think that youth, I think they do have the power to change. We have witnessed that, for example, also back in 2016, before the COVID-19 crisis, that there were a number of students that would actually protest, and they would skip school, and they would actually go on the streets and protest. And this was done by Greta Thunberg. So mainly by her ideas and her philosophy. So I think it is time also for us, and maybe us as students, to engage the youth again in how important it is to tackle climate and how important they are as a voice. And I don't know, Stan, if you have anything to add?
I totally agree with that statement.
Okay, so the next question, thank you for this great presentation. Welcome. Thank you. I have a question about the status of the 6 topics in Laag Kwartier. Do you know on which basis they were on which?
Oh, yes. Okay, so they are based on document analysis. So, for example, the Court of Audit has done a research, and they talked with the citizens. And what came out was actually also that they felt that they weren't heard as much, and that they had these expectations built by the council meetings that haven't been met. So this has mostly been done through interviews and mainly by the Court of Audit. Moreover, also the Hague University of Applied Sciences has also done an interview, and there it was stated that the research, the council meetings, that they unfortunately did not represent the Lac quartier and its population. But this was all again done through interviews. I hope that answered your question.
So Greg Hoon is asking if we have compared the study with the city's master climate plan that was announced in 2020 by raising public awareness. I know that there's the climate tables, right, of the city of The Hague, and we also looked into those meetings, and I even went to one of the climate tables. So I think the master plan of making it more public aware, we didn't compare the study, but we incorporated those plans into the study. But I also think that, again, what Anastasia was already saying, this public awareness is focused on the people that can understand those texts and that can read those texts. So, for example, there's a lot of EU mobile citizens or EU labor migrants in the neighborhood of Lac, and those were not included, right? So sometimes they're not leaving after a season is done, but they come back or they stay there. So most of the time these people stay in the neighborhood, but they are not really involved in this public awareness. So that's also one of our main advice is to also include other languages for these climate plans, but English, right? So not only English and Dutch, but also other languages. Did you see any difference in emphasis between the youth versus educated policymakers in terms of the scope of climate justice, more locally or internationally focused, or more intersectional, less intersectional in how people discuss it? So that's a really difficult question because we had statements about it's a city of peace and justice and about EU climate policies. So climate justice was not a topic as such in these statements. So I cannot really say there's a difference in how they view climate justice. It was just about justice in the neighborhoods, about justice in schools, about the peace and what peace means to young people and what the absence of peace means to them, and also what they thought about sustainability movement, and not really about climate justice. So I cannot really answer that question. Often in participation processes, the usual suspects come to meetings. Yeah, that what we all also noticed, and give their input. How can we engage with harder to reach groups who often have more urgent issues on their mind? Do you have any ideas about that, guys?
Yeah, I think first of all, that's a great question. Yeah, I think what is important is that while that, of course, they have more urgent issues on their mind. However, I think it's the duty of the municipality to engage with them. Perhaps just go door to door and see if they are actually interested, but also perhaps provide training to municipal officials that are capable to talk with them in their language, or maybe to engage with them with their cultural background in mind. And I think that if we emphasize these things, I think that we might actually be able to engage them. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and also maybe different languages, right? So Polish,
definitely.
Romanian, the
Yeah.
languages that the people in the neighborhoods actually speak. I think that's also really important. So after these great questions, thank you all. We also have some statements, and Anastasia is gonna do the magic.
I'm sorry.
Where is it?
Yeah,
Technical
fine.
difficulty.
Let's share. Into...
Oh. Our first statement is youth participation should be an integral part of climate justice. Should we?
Yeah, so our idea was that you raise your hand if you are in favor of this statement, and then maybe you can also tell us why.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. This one little sort of-
Maybe from the agreeing side and the non-agreeing side. If anybody wants to take the word to explain why they agree in on these statements, they may.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also a young person myself, I like to believe. And I think that climate justice, an important part of climate justice is generational justice. So you need to include the voice of next generation, basically.
Yeah. Great. Someone else? Perhaps Hasse van der Veen, would you like to explain or elaborate?
Or someone else?
Or somebody who doesn't agree with the statements?
Yes, that would also be interesting. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to the second one. The term climate justice has been colonized by policymakers. If you agree, again, raise your hands. And perhaps also if you disagree, you can also raise your hand and perhaps elaborate why. That would be interesting as well.
Here, Melly? Oh, you're taking your hand away. So anyone who wants to elaborate on this question or statement? We were thinking about this statement because years ago, climate justice was only mentioned by activists, right, on the street, by Extinction Rebellion, for example. But nowadays, climate justice has actually been something that policymakers care about, right? But still, it's really difficult to do it in the right way because sometimes it's bureaucratically impossible, right? So if you're seeing the prices of energy, for example, the gas prices go up, and then policymakers make sure that households who cannot pay that will be helped with that. But then in the end, in the Netherlands at least, they couldn't make a difference between the poor people or the well-to-do. So they gave everyone in the Netherlands the same amount of money, which is absurd, of course. So Atour is saying it depends what you mean by colonized. Has it been co-opted or incorporated? I think it's an open question and worthy of empirical inquiry. I agree, and that's why I was explaining what we mean. So colonized is, it's not only a term anymore used by activists, but it's also used by policymakers, which is a good thing, with the footnote that most of the time policymakers do not know how to act upon it. So if you have anything that you would like to say about this statement, that would be great.
Yeah.
I feel like it's almost been politicized now that the right parties use it for their side. I believe that activists, and as you mentioned earlier with Fridays for Futures, they are still going today, just much less active on a regular basis, but they still use the term a lot. Extinction Rebellion still uses the term a lot, and I think they are true to what the term means, but then political parties use it to sometimes make their policies sound greener or more climate justice related than they actually are. So it's almost used in a marketing sense to some degree sometimes, I believe. So yeah, I've colonized, I'm not sure, but yes, taken over. I'm not sure if it's in necessarily a good or a bad way.
Yeah, we agree. Anyone that wants to shed their light on this statement? Because we think it's really something to study, right? On the one hand, the policies from the European Union, for example, are really green. Also, after these elections, we expect not the whole European Green Deal to fall apart. So measures are being taken. The innovations in terms of tech are going forward. So some things are improving actually, but then at the same time, it's not just as it should be. So
Yeah.
anyone who wants to
I want to react on a statement made by Arthur, who thinks that colonize is a misleading term. I do understand where you're coming from. I understand your point of view, but I think colonized might be the correct label to use. Why? Because these are mainly the policymakers are mainly always white people from Western Europe, or let's just say like the colonizers, or the people that have been the countries that have been colonizing. And I think that again, this term is used, climate justice has been used by those policymakers, but without protecting the global south, for example, as Rosa has mentioned before. So in a way, I think colonize might be a correct term, because again, the colonized people are at a disadvantaged point or position. So yeah.
okay, so the third statement.
Oh.
Oh, there's another hand raised.
Now, do you want to take the word? Or
I can't really see who raised their hand, so
I think it was Greg. I don't know. I'm not sure. We can also move on to the next question. If there are any, if somebody wants to come back to a question or statement, they can.
it's Greg.
Yes.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. My computer wouldn't do it. But I think, as you know, when it comes to climate justice and policymakers, I think it's a matter of framing and implementation. Because I mean, obviously, policymakers have jumped onto the term climate justice, but that does have varying interpretations, particularly for some people might actually create policies that prioritize technology solutions or market-based mechanisms like carbon trading, rather than necessarily the kind of, addressing those root causes of climate injustice that, the activists were probably more, fighting for to start with, finding more equitable solutions for vulnerable communities.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Thank you, Greg, for your insightful comment. And I think we should move on to the next statement.
Oh. Yeah. And dus up again. I think, yeah. Yes. Statement 3, youth groups are not included in the discussion on energy transitions. So you can put your hand up if you agree with this statement. And if you've got a question or a comment, you can ask it.
Okay. I agree with it to some degree, while disagreeing with the statement that you made earlier, actually. I agree that they're not fully involved, and I think you can see it in the way that what you mentioned earlier with Fridays for Futures, when you said that the youth has a voice, that has actually declined incredibly since 2016, where you now have bigger marches once in a while, but the frequency has declined, and I think it comes from people not being as motivated because they feel like their voices aren't heard properly. So yeah, I think they're not fully included in discussions. I mean, this is about climate in general, but also in energy transitions. I think especially for energy transitions, a lot of times people believe that young people don't have enough expertise on such a technical field. But yeah, it was actually, I just remembered that this brought up a question of mine that I wanted to phrase earlier about, you said that youth has quite some power, like you saw with the protests in 2016, starting with Fridays for Futures. But actually, I wanted to ask about how you see it today, because Fridays for Futures happens much less. Bigger marches once in a while, but otherwise the frequency has decreased. So do you still think that they have much power in that movement?
I don't know. I guess in a way, I think maybe the power has diminished a little bit, especially because you see the growing rise of far-right political movements and people, and they see them as very extreme. And I think in a way that's because the voice of the far right is quite loud and it's growing, I think that their power and influence diminishes, but I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Oh, good. Just wanted to see a viewpoint. Thanks.
Okay.
So a tour is also asking, I answered your last question, but then it's in another bar. So